Yeah.
My parents give me money, so it's their problem, not mine.
That's true. Well, maybe the situation is not that bad, at least for some, for now. Some Singaporeans are still able to adapt to the economic climate.
However, there are still, of course, those who feel the wallet tightening. So, what's the difference between inflation and stagflation?
Stagflation. Basically, we were talking about stagflation just
Earlier
now, right?
on,
So how do you link it back to the whole concept of inflation? How is it related?
Well, inflation is part of the story of stagflation.
Okay.
Right. The other part of the story is stagnancy, stagnant income, stagnant economy. So inflation is half the story. But we don't have stagflation. So I don't think we should worry about stagflation in the context of Singapore at this time.
At least for now.
Yeah, inflation is worrying. I mean, 7.5% is pretty bad. But even that, I think there's a good chance that it will come down. Because oil prices have come down, commodity prices have come down over the last couple of weeks at least. And so I think inflation is basically headed down. So I don't think it's something to be terribly concerned about.
Okay.
What is concerning possibly is the length of the slowdown in the US and the depth of it, as well as Europe. Now, if this carries on for like 2-3 years, I think then we might be more badly hit. But as of now, I don't think there's any reason to believe that. And I think Singapore has some pretty good things going for it domestically. We're going to have the Formula One.
That's true. That's
going
to create jobs all over.
Yeah. You're going to have these 2 integrated resorts coming on stream in, 2010. You're going to have the Youth Olympic Games. There's the remaking of Orchard Road.
That's
There's Gardens by the Bay. There's so many infrastructure projects, in transportation, other areas. All this is going to create activity, is going to create jobs. So while the global environment may be harsh, I mean, the domestic environment is pretty okay.
Yeah, that's right. On that context, you're
That
the
brings us
expert
to-
on unemployment as well. You think the creation of jobs in the IR and all these upcoming projects could actually cover the effects of inflation?
I think just to maybe to just qualify that the areas that I cover is financial services, and in terms of commercial sector and things like that, we do actually see it on the side impact on where it comes to financial services. But when it comes to masses of jobs being created, yes, definitely the IR, etc. But it'll be interesting to see that whether you create employment for Singaporeans, or does it mean that we'll actually be hiring more people from overseas into Singapore for those roles? So whether it does actually make a dent on today's population figures, I'm not sure. Or is it going to be new figures that we're probably going to import in as well?
So how about the news of the economic survey released today, with inflation peaking, with a slowing rate of economic growth? What does this mean for the everyday Singaporean? Is he going to lose his job, get retrenched?
I mean, that's where we are at Robert Walters, the people that we meet on a day-to-day basis tend to be more the well-heeled professionals, and from that perspective, I think once you have passed a certain income level, the current rises in terms of inflation worries do not affect too many people, at least unless you happen to be an expatriate, let's say, and then suddenly you need to have international schooling costs, etc. That's going to come in, and they have to face in terms of translation of the Sing dollar. I mean, right now the Sing dollar is strong, but in a year ago, if they had to go back to Australia, they'll probably find it's going to be very, very expensive and things like that. So, in terms of the inflation environment, it's not just Singaporeans it's affecting, it's probably also affecting a lot of people who are non-Singaporeans who are considering coming to Singapore. And Singapore, whether the lower income tax in Singapore is now offset by the inflationary pressures, and once the 2-year lease is up, what's going to happen to them. And talking about the day-to-day people on the street, I think the interview just now showed that it was held right in the heartland. I think this is where it affects the people the most.
That's right.
But I think that in certain consumer spending, or we're talking about the private banking area or people the higher net worth, I don't think spending has actually dropped that much at that level. So I think you have to segmentize it in terms of different types of levels of income groups.
So, gentlemen, do you think that with the news today, should Singaporeans be sitting up and taking notice and be worried in terms of everyday living? Should they be worried at all? Any takers?
Well, just to take off on one of the points made earlier, there are going to be jobs created, new jobs created. The IRs are going to hire thousands of people. If you talk to the people in those companies which are constructing the IRs, they will tell you it is hard to find people. enough people to hire to fill the jobs that they have. So it is possible that some foreigners will be taking those jobs, but I think it's important that the Singaporeans can reskill themselves, to be able to work in the casino industry, in the hospitality business, in the retail business, in the F&B kind of areas that are going to be pretty big. They're going to be pretty big in Singapore. So you might have people who are doing something else right now. Maybe they're working in manufacturing. Maybe their industry is facing a slowdown, and it is possible that they have more opportunities in these other areas. So people need to skill up. People need to change. People need to retrain. Maybe. So I don't think they need to be worried in the sense that there will be jobs, and people will have jobs to go to. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And as for the high end, I don't think we need to worry about them at all. They can look after themselves.
They can worry for themselves.
They can worry about themselves.
So what's your take on it?
I think what Vikram said is correct. I think in terms of sometimes what is shown in the papers are not necessarily what reflects the number of jobs that are being created. For example, private banking, people who have lost money in credit trading, subprime traders who lost their jobs. It creates a lot of headlines because a lot of money, but the number of people who actually lost their jobs, at least in Singapore, it's not that many. Whereas there's something like an IR, whether in manufacturing, tourism, retail, services related, those are the areas that create lots of employment. So I think there's also a disconnect between what makes the headlines in terms of the figures, money. One trader you can create lots of millions, but in terms of number of jobs actually created, it could be a different story. For example, the number of hedge funds that are being set up in Singapore, lots of pages in newspapers, but number of people employed very little. So I think we need to balance that as well. So if you're talking about jobs for the mass market and things like that, with what Vikram has said, with the construction boom that's anticipated ahead of us, with the tourism sector and with our resorts and things like that, it will create a lot of jobs in the market. But having said that, that doesn't drive demand. I mean, demand has to come from externally.
Okay.
The resorts are not supposed to as much to make money from Singaporeans as much try to attract people to come to Singapore, and we are still in that sense prone to the external factors.
Right. So what are some of these external factors? You were telling me just now. That's causing this?
Well, the big external factor is the U.S. economy.
That's right.
Now, U.S. is going through, its housing bubble has burst. Okay, they had a huge run-up in housing values from about 2001 to last year.
Right.
And that has now burst. So housing prices are falling in America. Now, along with that, various other problems arise. The banks that are holding the mortgages, right? The mortgages are in negative territory. They are underwater. People can't service their mortgages. Then people used to draw out home equity, When the price of your house increases, you can borrow a little more, take some money out and spend it. Right. They're using their homes as an ATM, right, basically, yeah. So that has come to a standstill. So people in America are spending less. I mean, the consumers are hurting. Right. They're also hurting from high inflation, by the way. That's a separate story.
This is a global phenomenon, right?
Yeah, high inflation is a global phenomenon. Okay. In Europe, it's a similar story. There, too, you have troubles in the banks, for similar reasons. In many countries in Europe, you also had these big run-ups in house prices, in places like Spain, right. Ireland, London, UK, and elsewhere. So similar problems. Negative equity values. People can't use their homes as ATMs. They spend less. They spend less means the economy suffers. And then they buy less. They buy less, and they buy less from Asia.
Right.
They buy less from us.
That's right.
So we suffer. So that's where it's basically coming from.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this evening, rather optimistic views from both gentlemen. Employment's going to be doing just fine. A bit cautious, but doing okay.
Well, I think it will be. I think we are cautious. I think the motivation to look for a job will be different from last few years. Last time it would be just like, give me a pay premium. Right now is that there's not much of a pay premium, but there is an opportunity to move. As far as institutions that we work with, a lot of them have budgeted headcount beyond the next 2 years. They have sign-on leases for capacities that are far bigger than the current operation. So you do know that in the longer-term future, as long as Singapore can maintain our cost base, I know we can be competitive and attract more roles in Singapore. But what will be interesting, I guess, for my line is that not just the roles that are cost-based, we'd like to see more revenue jobs as well, because a lot of these jobs, I guess, are also probably not in Singapore.